and it's an unusual conference in that it's so small we don't need a microphone, but big enough that I haven't met everybody yet. And so if I haven't met you yet, I hope that you'll have the opportunity at the coffee break or at lunch, because one of the things that has been so wonderful for me being involved with MoMath is the ability to meet people all over the world who are doing amazing creative things with math and math outreach. Even just in this room yesterday, or outside the room with the clowning and the images I saw, it's been fabulous. So please do find me and introduce yourself. I'll be trying to find you as well. So my name is C.Lawrence. I am not a mathematician, unlike many of you in this room, but I am a math lover, and I fell in love with math early on after having a traumatic experience with math in second grade, which still stays with me. So I think I appreciate how many people feel about math. And I think it was after the summer break, we returned to school, and maybe the first week of school, we were given some problems to assess where we were in math, and there was a subtraction problem with borrowing. And no one ever really explained the logic behind this. It was just a rule that you memorized, but after a summer break, I didn't remember. But I do remember sitting and looking at those problems and having no idea, knowing there was something I was supposed to do, but not having any recollection, and looking around at everybody else writing away. And as soon as somebody showed me again, I was okay. But I remember that feeling, and that's something that we really work hard to avoid when people come into the museum. And so my not being a mathematician was actually somewhat critical to the development of the museum, because we were working with teams of mathematicians who had amazing ideas, but sometimes their ideas were up here, and we're trying to reach people down here. And there's a real risk that if you come in too high, that people come in, they try to do something, they see that there's something wonderful, but they feel like they're excluded from it. And so if they leave feeling like, yeah, I can't do that, it's too hard for me, I'm not good enough, then we have the counter effect of what we want. And so I viewed my role then, and even still today, as being somewhat of a translator. And so I would say to the mathematicians, that sounds like a really great idea, but you lost me right here. And they were very patient, and they would explain. And then I would often say, I still don't get it. And it was a very humbling experience for someone who never got anything other than an A in any math class all the way up to 300 level in university, to not understand so much. But they were patient, and eventually I would say, oh, wait, do you just mean, and I would say it in my own words. And very often they would say, that's what we've been saying all along. And I would say, well, that's not exactly what you were saying, but if it is, can we say it my way? Because I think people will understand what I'm saying. Now, because they're mathematicians, about 50% of the time they would say, of course, it's the same thing. We want to say it your way. You think that's better? Fine. But the other 50% of the time they would say, well, what you said is not exactly what we've been saying. And then we would go around again until I understood the nuances of what was different, and I would try again. And we weren't successful in every case, but we were successful in a lot of cases with building exhibits that I think people can enjoy at many different levels, and we'll see a little bit about that in my slideshow. So 10 years is how long we have almost been opened. We actually had our opening ceremony on 12/12/12. These are dates to remember, and it works in Europe and in the US. So it was a good date to open, and so we're coming up on our 10th birthday. And looking back at 10 years, I found 10 words that all have the number 10 in them. And I think these are things that apply to all of us in this room, to everything you're doing in math outreach. Most of these words will probably resonate with you. So we're going to go through them, and it's a little bit of a history of MoMath, a little bit of what's going on today, a little bit of the challenges we still face through 10 words of 10. So the first one is TENacity, and everybody here, when you start doing something new, you have to have this criteria. When we started, we talked to a lot of people that were big, powerful people in New York, and these are some of the comments we got back. It's a poor business idea. Everyone hates math. nobody will come, it's destined to fail. And I have to say, I did like the last one just in terms of the wordplay. It was actually a headline in an article, and it said, "Math Museum, ? It just doesn't add up." So, you give points to the author for being clever, but at the same time, it really enraged me because it was like an art magazine. It wasn't even anyone who should know anything, but I found the author, and I challenged the author to have a meeting with us. This is probably a year before we opened. And the author said, okay, and we showed the author all kinds of things, really cool things. And a follow-up article was written that basically said, okay, if anyone can do it, these people can, and I'm gonna be there on the first day waiting to come in. So that to me was like, yes, we managed to change one person's mind. Now if we can just magnify that. So we had to have some tenacity in the face of all of this. One of our current biggest donors is the one who said, poor business idea, and didn't give us any money initially. And then we said, well, we're just gonna go ahead and do it anyway. And then eventually that person came around and said, wow, actually, I think I was wrong, and became one of our biggest supporters. But in the face of all of this sort of negativity, it takes some tenacity to say, we're gonna do this. So the first thing we were doing was building a traveling exhibit. I'll come to more of that later. But one of the ideas was to take this square-wheeled tricycle that Stan Wagon, as a mathematician in the US, had come up with. It doesn't really work to have it the way Stan had it for a museum because it's just a sort of straight track and it has an end, and believe it or not, a tricycle with square wheels can be very heavy. So in a museum, the idea that after every person uses it that you would have to like pick it up and move it again didn't work well. So we wanted to make it circular. And I still remember sitting around the table with lots of really smart people, and the word that came up most often was impossible. Impossible, it will never work. You can never build this in a circular shape and make it work. And then there was one little voice next to me that was George Hart, some of you may know him, and he was kind of muttering to himself, but he was like, it's just an engineering problem. And anyone who knows George knows he's brilliant, and I already at that point knew he was brilliant. So when I heard him say that, I knew we were gonna do it. This doesn't mean it was easy. The first couple versions did not work. It turns out that people cannot steer accurately enough to make this work. So you have to actually lock the steering in place. It also turns out that you need rubber tires and sandy paint because for the math to work, the tire can't slide up and down the arc that it's going over. It has to roll smoothly. So there was a lot of working this out. And by the way, even to this day, you have to think about the fact that rubber wears. So even though the edge length of your square wheel is exactly right when you start, after people are riding it day and day and day and day, this edge length changes. And so you actually have to push the trike a little closer to the center. And you keep doing that for a while until finally you go, okay, time to change the tires, and then you pull it back out. So like these are all things that you don't know about, but indeed it was just an engineering problem. And you can see that in fact we built it. Little quiz for everyone. There are some people that you might recognize other than me in here. Anybody recognize anybody?
Tom Crawford, Bill Nye, and then I don't know the other.
Okay, Tom Crawford, that's up in the top right, and Bill Nye, science guy, top left. Anyone recognize the guy in the bottom left?
Some guy.
This is definitely not a US crowd. What'd you say?
Jeff Bezos?
Jeff Bezos, yes. And the guy on the right is Robert Digraph. He runs the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and that's his wife with him. Jeff Bezos is interesting because these kind of security people showed up in the museum, and you kind of know, like they're checking us out. These are not regular visitors. So there was a suspicion that somebody was coming. And then this guy walks in.
Didn't tell you before?
No. I wasn't even in the museum, but I got a phone call. We think Jeff Bezos is here, so we went running. And I don't know what he looks like. I didn't then, I do now. And I'm like, are we sure that's him? Look at all the security. It's him. Okay, fine. So he's with his kids. So now as a parent, like you don't really want to bother someone who's with their kids, but as a museum director with someone who has that much money, like, of course I'm going to bother him. I just went over to him and I just very nicely said, you know, I'm the director, I just want to welcome you, I see you're with your kids, I'd be happy to give you a personal tour, but if you'd rather just be with your kids, as a parent, I get that, I will leave you alone. And he said, yeah, I'd really rather just be with my kids. And I said, okay, that's fine. And I started to walk away, and then he goes, wait, can you just tell me, what is the point of this exhibit? And so I told him, and he's like, oh, that's so cool. And then I started to walk away, and he goes, wait. And by the time we were done, I'd spent an hour and a half. I'd basically given him the tour, but just with him asking, but what about this? But what about that? And a lot of times in the museum, I do hear people say those three words, that's so cool. And I love walking through the museum and hearing that, but I was counting with him and I stopped counting at 12. So he had a great time, and the end of the story is that he has never given us one penny, but he had a great time.
Knowing him, that's normal.
Apparently, we should have been making friends with his ex-wife. However, but it was still fun, and he did agree to let us use the picture, and so that's a fun thing to have on the website. So more TENacity was involved. This actually was not a bad thing for us. So there was a financial crisis in 2008, which some of you may remember. The headlines, people don't look happy. But this actually, it wasn't so bad for us, because this is 2008. People were losing a lot of money, and that meant that people who are philanthropic, which in the US, museums survive by people giving you money. It's not, the government doesn't support us at all. So people weren't giving money to museums anymore. Museums, when they don't have money, they stop building new exhibits. And then there are companies called exhibit fabricators that build these exhibits, and they have no work. So here we come with wanting to build a traveling exhibit of mathematics into this environment where all of these exhibit fabricators have no work. And so all these big fabrication companies are bidding on our tiny little 1,000-square-foot exhibit that we want to build. And so that was good for us. Also, building an exhibit of the kind that we wanted to build is normally a 2 to 3 year project. We did it in 4.5 months with 5 different fabricators. They all wanted our business. We just divided out all the exhibits. And we built about 20 exhibits that comprise something called the Math Midway. And we made our debut in June of 2009. That's just some of the images from that day.
So you already had financing.
So yeah, I didn't know that. So I was told we had a little bit of seed money. It turned out we had about $1 million. So that was a surprise to me. From private individuals, mostly people who had made their money in the world of hedge funds and finance. So these are people who were wealthy because of math. These are all the kids who loved math and were on the math team and then decided to go into finance, and it turned out they made a lot of money. So this whole community of people, basically everyone gave some money, and we had enough money. We were supposed to build 1 tent. You can see in that picture over there, there's 4 tents with the white roofs. We were supposed to build enough exhibits for 1 tent, but the design firm that we ended up hiring to help oversee this with us, the lead designer assigned to us was a guy named TENacity. Some of you have met him because he's still working with us today. He fell in love with the project, and I do remember saying to the other organizers, Glenn Whitney and George Hart, we have a contract for 1 tent worth of exhibits, and it seems like they're designing a lot more. Like, we have so many ideas, we thought it will be narrowed down, but they're designing a lot more, and I was worried, are we gonna have to pay 4 times as much? But it turned out this guy just fell in love with our project too, and so he just was happily designing, and we didn't get charged any extra for it. So, and after we built this exhibit, the plan was to travel it to other science museums around the country. However, because we knew nothing about running science museums or museum traveling exhibits, we didn't realize that those are generally booked 2 to 3 years out also. So now we had this 4,500 square foot traveling exhibit in June of 2009, and no idea what to do with it on June 15th, 2009. A woman showed up that day on June 14th. She was a math teacher in a local alternative school, and she said, we're doing a unit on museums and mathematics, and so could we have your exhibition in our school? Thank you. So the first place it went was actually a school. The deal was they had to open their school on the weekends to let the public come in. and they had to let us bring other schools in during the week so that we could learn how to run field trips and run somewhat of an exhibition. And then I went on vacation with my family to Hershey Park, and we passed by a science museum, made a quick right turn in, talked to someone there who said, we have no room for this exhibit, we're just a very small museum. I said, well, would you take some of it? At that point, I was willing to give away, you know, an exhibit here, an exhibit there, because this wasn't gonna fit in my garage. So she started looking through the brochure. Oh, we'll take this. Oh, we'll take that. And by the end of the meeting, everything in the brochure was circled, and we were talking about we could put this in the cafeteria, we could put this in the lobby, and we did put this in. And that kind of gave us enough bandwidth that after that, we were able to make our way into science museums. And we traveled for 5 years without a break. It went from museum to museum. And the plan was to sell it after 5 years, and we did sell it. And so that exhibit is still in the Science Center of Singapore, as far as I know. So that was a fun way to break into this sphere, and also it was a proof of concept. So we took a lot of potential donors, potential trustees to different science museums, wherever it was, to show them, because you can talk about it, but when you see people actually enjoying it, that makes a much bigger difference in terms of raising money. So TENacity, we made this banner about 2 years before 2012, so at the end of 2010, early 2011. And I remember saying, we shouldn't put a date on it. We should say opening soon, because how do we know when we're gonna open? But Glenn, who was the guy who had the original idea for this, said, if we don't believe we're gonna open, no one else is gonna believe it either. And so we're not gonna have any doubt. I don't wanna hear any doubt from anyone. We are opening in 2012, and that's all there is to it. And so we put this up, and it kind of was like a relief. Like, I was worried about what if we don't open in 2012. There were a lot of museums in New York. The Jackie Robinson Museum had been trying to open already for more than a year before we got started. They just opened last year. So there's a lot of examples of museums that are trying to open and don't make their deadlines. But I believed it. He was so convincing that I believed it too, and then I could become convincing. And then Hurricane Sandy hit, and I don't think it was necessarily a big deal here, but on the left, what you're seeing is Manhattan with half of it in the dark. We're in the dark half. We had no power. And what that meant was, this was October 2012. We were supposed to open in December, but we were supposed to have our soft opening in October, try things out, see what worked, what didn't work. We had lots of exhibits on trucks coming across the country when this hurricane hit. No trucks were allowed in Manhattan for weeks. We're now paying for our exhibits to sit on trucks outside Manhattan. Most of and by the way, even though that was going on, notice we still have opening December 15th. We just locked into that date, and we're like, we're just doing it. And so some of the exhibits, and by the way, 12-12-12 was the big opening for all the donors. So that's why I said we open on 12-12-12. We open to the public on the 15th. But many of the exhibits were installed on 12-12-12. Like the same day we opened, the trucks finally were coming in. And so we had never even tried the exhibits in the museum. And that was sort of a calculated risk. So we were debating between pushing off to Martin Luther King weekend in January, which is a big holiday weekend for museums. And our press company said, you know, if you push your opening until January of 2013, you'll get a lot of good press, like another misfortune caused by this terrible hurricane. But we were like, no, we said 2012. We have to open in 2012 or we're gonna lose credibility. And so we just stuck to it, even though we paid for that in the months to come, because some of the exhibits did not hold up to thousands of people banging on them. It's amazing what happens when you use something over and over and over and over again every day. Vanessa's smiling because she runs a museum of math herself, and so she knows what I'm talking about. Anybody who has anything with physical manipulatives knows what I'm talking about. In fact, when we started traveling the exhibition and that midway around, I would go everywhere it went, and I would meet with the people that run the exhibitions or do the education programming, ask a lot of questions. And one of the things I asked was, how do we make exhibits so they won't break? And that got laughter. You can't make exhibits so they won't break. What you can do is design them so that you know how they'll break, and fixing them is not expensive or hard or time consuming, but you cannot design things so that they won't break. And we have stories from the New York Hall of Science, which was a mentor for us, of kids breaking through 1/4-inch steel. Like, you just wouldn't think that's possible. But anyway, we had TENacity, and there we are. We opened on the left. That is us flipping the switch to turn the museum on. That giant thing on the wall is a switch. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And there are the first visitors on opening day, which we were worried, would anybody be at the front door? So it was such a relief to see people waiting for us to open. We wanted to have a giant switch to sort of turn on the museum, because where we were having the sort of opening party was out our back door. And so and it was December, and it could snow, and it's cold, and people are in black tie and long gowns and high heels. So we could have made people walk all the way around the block to come in the front door and cut a ribbon. But I'm like, okay, women in gowns, they're not going to be happy with us if there's snow and they have to walk any distance. Whereas this place where we had the dinner was literally right across from our back door. So, okay, we're going to bring people in the back door. That's not so glamorous, but okay, let's do that. And we'll get everyone in, and it'll be dark, and then we'll get a giant switch, and we'll flip the switch, and like all the exhibits will come to life, and that's what we'll do instead of a ribbon cutting. And then we needed a giant switch. Well, it turns out Hurricane Sandy had flooded a lot of places downtown, and the person who was handling our construction was also dealing with a mess downtown on Rector Street, and the entire electrical panel had been submerged under salt water. And if you know anything about electrical panels, that's a very hard thing to recover from. Even if you can clean it off, the corrosion comes back. So they had to replace the panel. So he said, you need a big switch? I get you a big switch. And so he actually got 3 for us. Our designer kept one because he thought it was cool. My son, who was a student at MIT, thought it would make a great doorbell on his fraternity house, so he got one, and one went in the museum. But the PS to this is that it turns out replacing a giant electrical panel like this is not a fast thing. And so the building where these things were taken from had to make do with their own panel, and they had to hire someone to literally clean the corrosion every morning, and then it would come back and they would do it again until they got a new one. And our construction manager said, all right, don't tell anyone where you got these, because my boss is going, how come there are 3 missing? So there's a building in Rector Street that was minus 3 big switches for a little while. So, okay, that was TENacity, just sticking with it. There's also an element of pretense. And it's funny because I thought I was the only one who felt like I was an imposter in my role. But it turns out that there are lots of books written about this. And when you talk to successful people, and maybe more so women than men, although I know plenty of men who also have felt this, you can kind of feel like you don't belong, especially as a non-mathematician running a math museum. It's very easy to think that you're an imposter. And so all of us were imposters in the sense that none of us had ever run a math museum or any museum before. But there were some positives to that. Like, we didn't realize when we started that it should take years to build a traveling exhibit. So we just put out a bid and said, we need this done in 5 months. And we got bids, and so we just assumed that was normal. And it wasn't until we were halfway through the project that someone said, wait, when did you start? When are you going to have this on the street? So ignorance is not always bad, but we did have to get over that. And I thought this was cute when I looked up imposter syndrome, given that I know mathematicians are scrolling on napkins. I thought this was a cute way of showing the imposter syndrome. When something looks easy, but you discount it, especially when it's you the one who's doing it. And this was also very funny, because one of our trustees early on sent me one of those imposter books after having spoken to me. And I read it, and I said to him, but this book is for people who aren't really imposters, but I'm really an imposter. This book doesn't apply to me at all. And so I thought this was a very cute XKCD comic that we liked a lot. So, okay, so we get past the idea that we're going to have this museum. We're pretending we know what we're doing. We've reckoned with that. And now we actually need to make the content. We need to build this museum. And I'm just gonna show you 2 exhibits that are among my favorites. This is probably my favorite exhibit in the whole museum. And the reason this is my favorite is because it accomplishes something that we would hope every exhibit would accomplish, but every exhibit does not accomplish as well as this. And that is that this one exhibit appeals to many people in many different ways for many different reasons. And I should say that this is inspired by a little 2-dimensional exhibit in the Mathematicum in Gießen, Germany, which is literally a parabola drawn on the wall, 2 push pins, and a string with weights on either side. And you can just move the push pins to different places on the parabola. And what you discover is that if you draw a line through a parabola and you look at the 2 points where it crosses, the y-intercept of that line is always going to be the product of the 2 x values, or the absolute value of that product. And so what's fun about this is the vast majority of math PhDs who come into the museum are not familiar with this property of a parabola. I don't know how many of you are already familiar with it, but it's great to have a math PhD come in and see their eyes light up and go, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And there's sort of the math explanation that might look like something you would see as a math PhD. But suppose you're not a math PhD. Maybe you're in high school or even middle school. If you know those equations on the left, you can prove this. And it's not hard to do. In fact, every high school volunteer in our museum has to do this for me right during the interview. And I will walk them through it, I will give them hints, but they can all do it. If they can't do it, we don't hire them. But it's not hard. This is the thing. Algebra, geometry, I know you don't like geometry, but this geometry is not bad. So you've got the math PhDs, but then you have people sort of a level below. And when I saw that exhibit in the Mathematicum, I was just moving the tacks around. I'm like, why does this work? There has to be a reason. And I hadn't seen any math. I wasn't involved with this project so much yet. So I hadn't seen this kind of math in probably 20 years. But I sat down and I just started writing different things, and I proved that it can work. So if I could prove that 20 years outside of my math education, so lots of people can do this. So now you've got the math PhDs, you've got the high school, the middle school students. But what about kids that haven't learned this yet? Well, for them, this is a giant multiplication machine. If you push a 5 and an 8, 40 is going to light up. If you push a 7 and a 1, 7's going to light up. And so for younger kids, they just view this exhibit as a giant, cool multiplication machine. So now you've got the PhDs, you've got the high school and middle school students, you've got the elementary school students. What about the 3-year-olds? Okay, I push a button and I make a light come on. I know there are some little kids that are here, Alba's kids are here. Tell me that your kids don't like pushing buttons and making lights come on. You know too, Shawl is nodding her head. She's got a 2 or a 3-year-old at home. So here's an exhibit that a math PhD is going, that's so cool, and a 3-year-old is going, that's so cool, and everything in between. So I really love that exhibit for that reason. And we call that string product. And so here's where a great designer comes into play, because here in the Mathematicum, it's this flat representation on a wall. I actually fell in love with that, and I wanted to just replicate exactly that. Let's just have it on a wall. But the thing is, you want to go from -10 to 10 on the x-axis, which means you've got to go up to 100. And our designer said, we don't have high enough space to do it in any kind of nice way. And so we weren't going to do that. And then we had an exhibit planned for our staircase that fell through. We were short by 3 inches from doing an amazing disappearing staircase designed by John Ed Marks. So we had no staircase exhibit. And I said, wait a minute, you said we didn't have enough height, but what if we put this in the staircase? Then can we have this? Now, I'm still thinking on the wall, just that it's going to be on the wall as you go down the stairs. But a great designer says, that's a great idea. But as long as we're going to put it on the staircase, instead of a parabola, let's make it a 3-dimensional paraboloid, and let's have electroluminescent wire that lights up, and let's have a spiral staircase go around it. And it's like, yeah, let's do all of that. And so it's also really pretty to look at, almost like a piece of art, which I think is fun too. My other favorite exhibit is Math Square, and this is a fully programmable floor that recognizes where you are. It's not projection, it's recognizing with sensors in the floor, so you don't have to worry about shadows. On the left is a Voronoi diagram, which some of you will recognize, but we like to say we have the only Voronoi dance floor in New York City. And people don't know what that means necessarily, but it sounds cool, and when people are moving around and dancing, the regions are changing, and so it actually does make a very cool dance floor. On the right side is an exhibit which I love because it was designed in a weekend by 4 high school students at a hackathon. We opened the API for a weekend of this exhibit and one other exhibit, and we welcomed anyone to come, adults or kids. And we said, design a new behavior, and if we like it, we'll put it out. And this one went out with like no changes needed. And we have a little bit of a...
What is the second one?
Sorry?
This
one
one on the right.
Yeah, this is what I'm going to show you.
Oh, sorry.
So, yeah, they call it, we call it Venus. And so what it is there's like a sun in the center, and the first person who steps on the floor gets a planet that's orbiting around the sun. Okay, and you just see that circle. Now, another person steps on the floor at a different radius from the center, and they get their own circle. But those 2 planets are connected just by a straight line. And every time another person steps on, their planet is connected to the one immediately preceding. And what you start to see are lovely curves that show up, even though everything is just a straight line, and it gets very colorful and very pretty on the floor very quickly. Always something different depending when people step on and where they step on. And so, and this was designed by a bunch of high school students in a weekend. It just went right onto the floor. So I love that we have something that has people collaborating in this way. And you get these beautiful cardioids and star shapes. And if you go to venus.momath.org, you can actually play with this yourself. So that's a lot of fun. I'll just tell you one other story about that math floor. Shortly after we opened, I told you everything came in sort of right before we opened. And so some things weren't very reliable, and they were breaking a lot. And somebody called me up and said, I would like to propose to my girlfriend, and I would like to put a graphic on that giant math square, will you marry me, Alana? Can I do that? And I said, oh my God, how exciting. Someone's going to propose in the math museum. Okay, yes. But I just have to tell you that all the exhibits sometimes break. I can't 100% promise you, but having said that, I've done my legal duty. I will tell you, this is the exhibit in the museum that has never broken. This is the most robust exhibit that we have. It's totally fine. So he makes this plan, he sends us this graphic, we get it all set up. We're going to play their song as she's coming down the stairs. Now his whole family comes an hour early. They're all on the lower level waiting. His family, her family. We're excited too. And wouldn't you know it, like an hour before they come, the thing goes black. Oh my God, we're going to ruin somebody's life. She's going to say no. It's going to be bad. And we couldn't get it on, so I called the fabricator. I'm like, Joey, you got to help. He's like, I'm in the playground with my 4-year-old and 2-year-old. I can't help you. I'm like, Joey, somebody is not going to get married. So Joey, hearing the story, said, okay, let me pack up the kids and go right home. And somehow, just as the woman walked into the top level, this is on the lower level, the thing came on, and whew, she never knew she almost didn't get proposed to, but it was great. So yeah, that's another story about that exhibit. Okay, so now we have the museum, we've gotten over our fears that we don't know what we're doing, we've built some cool exhibits, we think, but now how do you get the word out? How do you get attention? So this is an excerpt of a chart. We do track our attendance, most museums do, and even if you're doing outreach, you probably are tracking your attendance to some extent. And so 2013 are the orange tall lines. And so in January of 2013, that's literally 2 weeks after we open, right? We open on 12/12 or 12/15. So it's normal to have a really big attendance your first month and a little bit less the second month. But what's not normal is that third month. What in the world in March of 2013 suddenly made our attendance go up? So now, is this going to play by itself, or do I need to? Let's see.
Okay. Probably decided against it.
It was playing before.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Joey, still it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I swear we tried this before.
Celle-là qui a jamais cassé.
Exactement.
Don't get it. Math. Still not sure what pi means.
The very word conjures painful memories. Long division, square roots, the quadratic equation. Not only do most of us not like math, we're also not very good at it. In an international test of 15-year-olds, out of 64 countries, the US placed 24th.
We don't currently in this country have a cultural expectation, but yeah, you're going to learn math just like you're going to learn reading. It's okay to not be good at math.
Glenn Whitney is good at math. He's got a PhD in it, and it's trying to change the way we think about one of our least favorite subjects. I loved math, I loved algebra, I really loved geometry. I hit the wall at pre-cal.
That's the problem, because you were only given one road to go through mathematics. You got the impression that once you hit the wall, that's it. There's nothing more for you. In fact, math is this extremely varied, beautiful landscape. And we're showing you just one road cut right through the center of it.
Whitney says our math curriculum is designed for rocket scientists, literally.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
50 years ago, America was in a space race against the Soviet Union, and beefing up our math program was seen as part of a winning solution.
We needed the young, bright science or math kid to be our hero to take us to the moon.
We have a liftoff, 32 minutes past the hour.
We haven't had a mission like that since then to capture the public imagination as to the importance of math.
That's where Whitney and his latest project come in. A museum devoted entirely to math. So this makes how many math museums in the U.S.?
With our opening, there's now one math museum in North America.
That's not a difficult math problem. The Museum of Mathematics, MoMath for short, opened in December in New York City. I look high. With $23 million behind it, it feels less like a classroom and more like a playground.
So continuing along with the element of surprise, we would not
Museum
expect-
co-founder C.Lawrence showed us around. Oh my gosh, wow. There's a square-wheeled tricycle that somehow rides like a dream. It's smoother than a Lexus. Great. Magic? Nope, it's math.
Go ahead, you can touch.
The relationship between math and music lights up.
What you're hearing is every sphere we touch, you're hearing 3 notes, a triad or a chord.
You can hear and see the intervals between musical notes. There's something almost sinister, eerie about it.
On this side you hear sinister, on this side you hear sort of more
Right,
happy.
minor keys are always kind of evil, right?
Exactly.
You can get your freak on with fractals.
So a fractal is a pattern of repetition where the same image is repeated over and over again, but in ever smaller sizes.
It's fun to play at the Museum of Math. And only here could you call a bathroom a math room. We're coming in.
It's okay? All is clear. So you might notice our sinks, if you look, they are sinks that go down to a triangular base.
The message is simple. Math is everywhere, a part of our daily lives. I'm just trying to think about my morning right now and see the whole math play.
All right.
Okay, so I woke up at 6:20. I guess there's math there, right?
In some sense, timekeeping was one of the original drivers for the creation of mathematics.
Okay. I got out of bed, I put my glasses on, I walked over to
Wait, stop right there. Optics has its foundation mathematics.
and then I got dressed, and I had a little bit of a hard time making the bow tie work.
Right. So I was going to say, I see your bow tie,
Okay.
and knot theory is one of the most vibrant, rich areas of mathematics right now.
Why didn't I take knot theory in high school? I would
Well,
have
that's
loved
actually
that.
a great question, right? It's just about taking a piece of rope and what are the different ways you can loop it around so that it's not just a circle. It's something that lots of people can enjoy. It's something that we show in the classes that come into the museum.
I want you all together to turn yourselves into the shuffle.
And that's the point. Math may not be easy as pie, but it's not so square either. Do you think that math lovers can seduce the math haters into liking math?
People who are really engaged with math understand that there's a lot of folks out there that don't see it the same way they do. And they really want to show them the beauty and the wonder and the excitement that they experience. So hopefully we've done that. That's certainly what we're trying to do.
All right. So that showed up on CBS Sunday morning, and literally, when it ended, within 10 minutes, people started pouring into the museum. It was insane. I would not have thought that a television show would have that impact, but literally people were coming in the front door saying, oh, we're visiting New York, and we had the television on in the hotel room, and we saw this, and we realized we're around the corner, and we came right over. And that really actually lasted for a while, that attention. So that was very helpful. InTENsity. So I think everyone in this room that does outreach in some way is intense about what you're doing. And I think you have to be passionate about what you're doing. Of course, passionate doesn't have 10 in it, and InTENsity does. But I view that as sort of passionate. And I'll give you an example. So about a year after we opened, in November of 2013, we were meeting with our volunteers once a month. These are the people that helped us get the museum open. And somebody said, you know, December 5th is coming up, and 12/5/13, or here in Europe, 5/12/13, that's a right triangle. We should do something. Okay, but it's only a month away. We probably don't have time to do something. But maybe, what could we do? Well, the Flatiron Building, which is one of our local landmarks, although most people think it's sort of an isosceles non-right triangle, it's actually a right triangle because Manhattan and that part of the city is an orthogonal grid, and Broadway cuts through, making right triangles as it goes along, and the Flatiron is nestled in there. And then we looked, and it turned out that the Flatiron happens to be a 5/12/13 right triangle. So that seemed like it was meant to be, but we only had a month to figure out what to do. And we tried all kinds of things. We were very stealthy. By night, we were going out in the dark, and we were shining flashlights and lasers on the side of the Flatiron Building, and ultimately we got these giant projectors that could project. We had 3 of them. We thought we'll do a projection on all 3 sides of the Flatiron Building at night and show a Pythagorean proof. And it turns out in the cold winter in December, so these projectors needed Duracell batteries that are like literally this big. So we had to build carts to drag the batteries along with the projectors. And those batteries would last 9 minutes if they were fully charged in a cold New York evening. So we did all this by stealth of night, and we put out one email, and we invited people to come and celebrate the Pythagorean theorem. We called it Pythagorize the Flatiron. And our email went nuts. From one email we sent out, we got more than 3,000 people signing up to come. Now I was a little bit worried because we didn't have any permits, we didn't ask any permission. I thought we were gonna have like 50 people, and I was trying to figure out how we could measure the sides of the Flatiron. We were using glow sticks as a unit of measurement. I was trying to figure out like can one person maybe hold 3 of them in some way, because we're not gonna have enough people to get all the way around. And instead, now we're gonna have the opposite problem of too many people and no permits. And so I decided I better call the local police department and come clean and tell them that there were gonna be thousands of people showing up at this spot. And I called and I left a message, and they called me back and I wasn't there, and they left a message. And we were going back and forth for about a week when it occurred to me this was a really good position to be in. Because if I never spoke to them, they couldn't say no. But if I got in trouble, I could point to all the messages I left, how I had really tried to let them know. And so that's what we did. I never spoke to them, but there was a police presence that night. And so we were able to do this. And
what's going to happen here is we're going to actually measure the 3 sides of the Flatiron Building. Using glow sticks as our unit of measurement, we're going to line the entire building with a giant glowing right triangle, the largest demonstration the Pythagorean theorem has ever seen.
As a nation, we're not graduating enough math majors. How do we get kids to do better in math? We get them excited about math.
So these are some pictures of people literally measuring the Flatiron. We counted off with glow sticks. We did come to the right numbers. It was really amazing. You can see in the top left how many people showed up. It was insane. just from one email. The other thing we did that I would encourage you to do is we asked people to get involved. We just said, bring or sport your favorite right triangle. And this just gave people a reason to do things. They had triangular hats. The guy on the left has a Pythagorean tattoo on his leg, which I don't think he did for us, but a group of college students down here, a group of senior citizens here. We had a newborn show up, and we had elderly people show up without kids. And so it was just great, the number of people that came and just got into this. And it was like kind of a flashy mob thing. Like, it was there, we did it, the batteries died, the projection went away, and we went back, and it was fun. Okay, so after we did this, I started to think, are there any other Pythagorean triple dates coming up? And it turns out, yes, August 17th, 2015 was gonna be the next one. And we had a summer intern, and I asked him, can you look around the Pythagorean theorem, 5, 12, 13 for the Flatiron building was great. Can you look around and see if there are any triangular buildings that are 8, 15, 17? And so after about a week, he came back to me and he said, there really aren't, and I know you probably aren't interested in knowing about this, but there is an 8, 15, 17 triangular building in Seattle. And this is what I mean when I say intensity, because if you're not intense, you go, yeah, that doesn't work for us. But if you're intense about what you're doing, you go, Seattle. Oh, I forgot to show this, sorry, before I go back to Seattle. That was such a big event with the Flatiron building that it made the Los Angeles Times in California, which is the other side of the country. And I love wordplay, so how great is that title? Some squares, some squares. We were the squares that were doing the summing. But anyway, so there's a triangle pub in Seattle that's exactly the right size. And so what do? Hey, we know the people who run the Pacific Science Center. Let's go to Seattle. And so there we are in Seattle, August 17th, 2015. What we did was we had a giant triangular replica of this building. The building turned out to be between several highways, so it wasn't safe to put people around it. But we went outside the Museum of History and Industry, MoHI, in Seattle. They have a giant front lawn. The Pacific Science Center partnered with us and with them. And we actually, you can see in the top left, there are people wearing 3 different colored shirts, green, blue, and red. We actually had exactly the right number of shirts, so that the red was 17 squared, and I think the green was 8 squared, and the blue was 15 squared. And we actually built human squares on the side of this with people in different colored shirts. So that was a lot of fun. And now, because you're all math people, I know what you're thinking, but what about 8/15/2017? So we actually went back to Seattle a second time, but we decided to do something different. And we did a puzzle hunt throughout Seattle at all of the sort of well-known attractions in Seattle. There was a different Pythagorean puzzle, and people went around to all the different locations. And then the culminating event was we went back to that triangle, and this time we had people planting colored pinwheels to make the squares on the side of the triangle, just to be a little bit different. And one of the women who came to, I think, the first event in Seattle is a woman named Tracy Drinkwater, who some of you may have heard of. She's now opening a museum of math in Seattle, and she was inspired by this event. So that was kind of a fun PS to the story, that not only did people have a great time, but we inspired a new museum in Seattle. So I think that was a good example of intensity, just kind of hearing something and saying, let's just do it. Let's just try it and see what happens. So attendance is important, whether you're doing a museum or whether you're doing outreach and you just want people to come to the event you're doing. I know you were telling me how Zoom has been a good thing, the pandemic, that suddenly you have a big audience that you didn't have before. So attendance is important, because if we're doing all this great work and nobody sees it, we're not really accomplishing what we want to accomplish. So here's another attendance hit for us.
So here at MoMath, visitors get to play with math. They get to see how math makes things that seem like they should be impossible actually possible.
funny story about this. You've probably heard of BuzzFeed, and so they do research about great places to visit. And so we got a call from BuzzFeed saying, we'd like to feature the museum, can we come in and film? So of course we said yes. And then they sent me a contract, a legal contract that I needed to sign. And sometimes I have to give a contract to a lawyer, but sometimes I can just read them and know that it's fine to sign, or in this case, not fine to sign. Because it basically said, we BuzzFeed bear zero responsibility. Even if we're grossly negligent and someone gets hurt, you agree to bear all the responsibility and we bear none. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what could happen? They're coming into film while cameras, cords, kids running, kid falls, bangs their head on something sharp, concussion. This could be bad for us. And also, if I sign this and something bad does happen, I will certainly be out of work because my board will say, how in the world could you have signed something like this? So I told them I can't sign that. And they said, we don't change our contract for anyone. We're BuzzFeed. Either you sign it or we don't film. And I said, well, you know, I guess I don't know what to tell you. I can't sign this. And we had already set a date for them to come and film, but we were wrangling over this contract. And the date came, and we had never resolved the contract issue. And I didn't think anyone was going to show up. But I went over to the museum just in case. And those two young women that you see right there, they showed up. They were all giggly. And I'm like, this is BuzzFeed? But okay, this is BuzzFeed. I expected, it's like a social media, I guess a blog of some sort. Or something. It's a social media outlet that puts up videos, and people apparently like to watch these videos. So I expected like big cameras and lights, but these two young ladies showed up with a cell phone. That's what they were using to film. And they didn't seem to know about this contract issue. They're like, hi, we're with BuzzFeed, we're here to film. I'm like, sure, go ahead. I'm thinking, okay, I didn't sign the contract. And then they finished filming and they were leaving, and one of them opened her purse and she pulled up this like crumpled piece of paper and she goes, oh, I'm supposed to get you to sign this. And I'm thinking, okay, they're done filming, nobody fell, nobody got hurt, no liability, okay, so now I'll sign it. I didn't know that when I signed that and agreed to let them do that, what was going to happen to us. But from that video, we had an attendance boost that lasted for months. That video ultimately had more than 21 million views. And let's see. So you can see this is our attendance. This is the day that BuzzFeed came out. And that just tracked for months. We were getting 1,000 people a day, which doesn't usually happen in the museum. And if we look back to history, so there's the opening, there's Mo Rocca, and here's BuzzFeed. So you can see we were kind of just chugging along, and then woo! And actually the chairman of my board called up, and he was very concerned about how much we had paid for that BuzzFeed. Because he said, you know, I've spoken to my people in my company, and I hope you didn't pay more than $400,000 for that, because that's what they say that was worth. And I say, great, because I paid zero. So, but you know, if I hadn't, if I had just said, don't come, I'm not signing the contract, I would have never known what I was missing. So attendance is important. We actually track attendance every single day. This is an excerpt from our reports back in June 2019. We had our 1 millionth visitor, which was that teacher in red with a school group around him.
I had a question.
Yes.
These peaks look very, very short.
What looks short?
The peaks and the attendance peaks. I would have thought there would be it wouldn't be just a few days.
So this isn't really an attendance peak. This is people looking at the museum's webpage.
Okay.
So what you're seeing here was just, we do track our attendance. I didn't have a graph like this for attendance. So this is just showing the attention that we got, but that translated into attendance. So this was in July or August of that year, and we had higher attendance all the way through the end of the year from that. So, oops, yeah, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so we hit our 1 millionth visitor, and we decided we had to do something to commemorate that. We're always about doing something fun, so we did something called the 1,000,000 millimeter march for MoMath. We actually traced out a path that was exactly 1,000,000 millimeters, leaving the museum, circling the Flatiron Building, walking through Madison Square Park, and back to the museum. And then we had people stationed at special numbers along the way. And on the left, that's Fields medalist Manjul Bhargava with his favorite number. It was really funny. I asked Manjul and Alex Kontorovich, who some of you may know, to come up with a bunch of numbers between 1 and 1 million that we could have people stop at. So they had like a little map, and you got a stamp when you got, and you learned about whatever was special about that number. And they kept giving me numbers like between 0 and 100. And I'm like, no, 100 millimeters, 70, 80, whatever it is, like, no, it has to be bigger so we get people to different spots. And then they had a lot of numbers that came in the middle of Broadway. I'm like, we can't do that, there's traffic. But eventually we got a series of numbers, and I'll just mention the one that Manjul has on his sign, 142,857 is a cyclic number. And if you don't know what a cyclic number is, type that number into your phone and try multiplying it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and you'll see that it's the same digits that just cycle around. If you multiply by 7, you get 999,999. It's fun, and so he just
1/7. It's the period
yes,
of 1/7.
yes. And so what's great about that is there's some real math in there, but for people that aren't interested in going that deep, they're just walking by on the street and they see a crowd around someone with a sign with a weird number. They just stop, take out their phones, and people are like gasping, like, oh, they're so shocked by the magic of what's happening with this number. And then if you went to all the stops and you got stamped in all the stations, then you got entrance to a party back in the museum. So it's also important to have competent people. And now this is a challenge and also a lesson that we learned the hard way. So if you hire people that aren't good at what you want them to do, it makes your life very difficult. And 10 years in, I mean, it's taken us 10 years to really get to the point where we've got an amazing team. This is especially important for people that are trying to convey mathematics to non-mathematicians, because you can be really good at math and not have the right social skills. You can be really great with social skills and not have the right math. And so there's this intersection of people that can do both. And you're all in that intersection, but finding other people like you can be really challenging. This is our senior leadership team, which is just an amazing group of people. We now also have a program where we invite someone to come for a year. So we have a distinguished visiting professor. Manjul in the top left, the Fields medalist, was our first. And it was really important to him that he come from Princeton to show people in other universities that spending a year doing math outreach, even if you're a Fields medalist and researcher, is actually a really valuable use of your time. And if Princeton lets its field medalists do this, then hopefully other universities will also. And so Pete Winkler, Alex Kontorovich, Steve Strogatz, Tim Chartier, who some of you met at Matrix, and next year we'll have Ingrid Daubschies. So this has been a wonderful program for us. These are some of our student interns that we had this past summer, and they were a terrific group. I told you they all have to prove the string product theorem before I'll hire them. But I want to talk a little bit about this group. This is a fellowship we recently started. And by the way, does anyone know who the one special guest is who's not one of the fellows in there? There's a little hint in the stuffed animals that 2 of the fellows are holding. Grant Sanderson, excellent. Grant is the one with the white logo on his shirt. He came to visit our fellows. He looks young enough to be one of them. But other than Grant, all of the people there are recent math major graduates. And so a challenge for us, and for those of you who run museums that are not associated with universities, you may have the same problem. If you're at a university, very often you'll have graduate students that are willing to come and serve as docents in your museum. But if, like us, you're a standalone, not near any university, the kind of people who want to be docents in a museum are typically recent math majors who either haven't decided what they want to do next or are waiting to do their next thing. They may be going to go to grad school or become a teacher or an actuary, and they just want to have a year or 2 years while they think about their future. Because nobody really comes to a math museum as a young 20-something-year-old and thinks, I'm going to stay here for 50 years as a docent in this museum, and this is the job I'll retire from. Especially when you're talking about people who can do the kind of math I want them to do. These are highly intelligent, competent people. And so what would happen to us is we would hire these great people, and when they figured out what they wanted to do next, they would leave. And there was no prediction to that. I know it's different in some countries in Europe, but in the US, the standard notice period is 2 weeks, 10 work days. And that's just standard, and that's what everyone does. And so you'd get a young person who was really great on the floor of the museum, and then they'd say, I've decided to go become an actuary or go back to school or be a teacher. And so this is my 2 weeks notice. I don't even know if I can get an ad out in 2 weeks. And so this has been an ongoing challenge for us, is this unpredictability of when staff move on. And so we had this idea, which is working out really well, and I want to share it for any of you that might have similar staffing needs, which is, okay, we know we're only getting people for a year and a half or so. Let's create a fellowship and let's us decide the timing. So it's a 1-year fellowship. And we hired all these young folks that are new graduates to come and spend 1 year with us. I know when their last day is. And when you sign up for a 1-year program, you're not looking in between to leave because you know you're here for a year. So all of these young people have plans. Many of them are going to grad school, and this is a gap year. Some of them are becoming teachers, and they all just were at a point in their life where they thought it would be fun to spend a year in New York City. Most of them are not from New York City, only one of them is. And so this is working out. It's only our first year, but it's working out really well so far. So I wanted to share that as both a challenge and a potential solution that might work if any of you have the same kind of staffing challenges. Being potent, being meaningful, we have 3 different independent studies that I just excerpted here that basically show, amazingly, that people do have changed perceptions about math even after a single visit to the museum. And we had hoped to have that effect, but to actually have a scientific study done and show that we are having that effect, that kids are thinking about math. Here's another one that we did in 2018. One of the things I'll point out here is that the museum was specifically designed not to look like what most people think about when they think about math. So there aren't a lot of numbers, there's not a lot of calculations that you see. And that's because when people come into the museum, if they already have a less than positive association with mathematics, we don't want them to walk in and go, oh, math. And so there are references to the arts and architecture and other things that are not necessarily associated with math that make people feel comfortable. And this was something that was pointed out in this study as being important. Physical activity is important, interactivity, I should say. And also, we were very pleasantly surprised that almost 50% of our visitors are adults coming without kids. So, and the one thing I'll mention from this study, the summary here, is the importance of staffing. So when you go to an art museum, you very often feel like you don't necessarily understand what you're looking at, but that's okay, it's art. When you come to a math museum, if you don't understand something, there's almost an anger and a frustration. And the best way that we have found to get people past that is to have a person who can talk to them at their level. So our staff are really good at assessing, oh, you're a math PhD, I'm gonna tell you something up here. Oh, you're a 5th grader. Oh, you're an adult that hasn't seen math in a lot of years. Oh, you're afraid of math. And really connecting with people in a way that's important. Extension, very quickly, we have exhibits in a couple different countries around the world. This is March 2020. We all know what happened in March 2020. The pandemic hit, we moved online, and now we have people participating from more than 120 countries around the world. And finally, PoTENtial. A challenge we all have in the math community is how to make women and non-white people feel accepted in the world of math. We don't have a solution for that. We are just, like everyone, trying different programs. This was a 3-part series that brought female mathematicians to talk with young folks, mainly young women. And similarly, we did a program with a bunch of Black mathematicians and scientists, just so that young people can see someone who looks like them, who they can identify with, and hopefully feel like they belong in math. And finally, a picture is worth 1,000 or 10 to the third words, and so I thought I would just close with some images, exhibits. This is our shop. I have some of these items here for you to play with. We have an art gallery. There are 3 presidential candidates in this. There's a Nobel Prize winner, an Academy Award winner, several TV stars, several professional sports players. We can look at that some other time if you want. Math Encounters, once a month, we run a lecture series. Andreas has been a presenter for us. We try to get people involved with cool bits of math. Family Fridays, very interactive for families coming together. Math Happenings, you recognize the Flatiron event, but lots of other events. Down in the center, that was Pi Day of the Century, 3.1415. An event for that. We bring math to music and dance, and we run a festival once a year and bring people together to share math. And so with that, I guess I've gone 5 minutes past, but if there are any questions, maybe we have a minute or two. And if you have questions, but you'd rather talk one-on-one, I'm here all week, and I would be delighted to talk with any of you about the things we've done well, the things we've struggled with, the ongoing challenges that we all face together. Thank you.